Mount Everest is the ultimate dream for most mountaineers. Many go through years of training and prior climbing experiences just to prepare themselves for such a peak. The reason is simple. Mount Everest is the tallest peak in the world with an elevation of 8,849 meters above sea level. The long climb spans over multiple days, exposing you to some of the most brutal conditions possible. There is no denying that reaching the summit marks a significant achievement in many people's lives. However, climbing Mount Everest certainly has a price. In 2023, 17 climbers died on Everest, 9 of which happened in May alone. Today we will focus on 2 of these climbers, both at different stages in life, but on the mountain at the same time. In the past, the expectation when you attempted an Everest summit was that you were a strong, self-sufficient climber with experience that could handle most situations. In recent years, we clearly see that in some cases this is no longer true. Instead, third-party expedition companies can advertise their Everest trips by needing little to no experience, as they will guide you step by step to the summit, as long as they are well paid, of course. The reasons why this is dangerous are quite obvious, as more and more inexperienced climbers attempt to summit Everest. This has certainly led to controversy building up in the community, and there is no better example than 59-year-old Indian teacher Suzanne Leopoldina Jesus, with record-breaking climbing permits granted for expeditions. Suzanne, a part of the Glacier Himalayan Trek, would travel to Nepal and from their Everest base camp. In early May, camp would be busy, to say the least, as there were over 47 different teams, all trying to reach the top. Typically, summit bids have to be shared across multiple expeditions, as the weather will only permit a few good days at high altitudes, which understandably causes long lines to build up in various locations. The weather in May fluctuated greatly on Everest, but the conditions would slightly improve as the month went on. The temperature would hover around 27 degrees Fahrenheit, or -2 degrees Celsius, and there would be stray storms that brought snowfall, adding to the risk of avalanches. Visibility was great if it was not snowing, and these would be the times that climbers had to take advantage of in preparation for her summit bid. Suzanne, like most climbers, would begin with the climatization trips, which consists of traveling to a higher altitude point, resting and allowing your body to become used to these conditions before returning back to your starting location. Normally this is repeated multiple times, and is not only used fully for climbers, but it is also helpful to provide information to the expedition leaders. On a climatization trip, Sherpas can see firsthand how clients will respond to different situations, and it is safe to say that there were very concerning signs for Suzanne. Accompanied by a Sherpa in the first week of May, they would take their first acclimatization trip, but would not make it far, as Suzanne struggled to make it past Crompton Point, a location 250 meters above Everest Base Camp. Normally it would take an experienced mountaineer 20 minutes to reach this location. However, it took Suzanne over 5 hours. On her first try, not wanting to give up, she would attempt to traverse again a few days later, but this time it would take her 6 hours. Became clear to the Sherpas that Suzanne would not be fit to climb Everest. They were honest with her and heavily warned against continuing, but she would not listen. At the age of 59, Suzanne had a dream of becoming the first Asian woman to summit Everest, with a pacemaker, who would state that she had to climb the peak, as the fee for acquiring permission had already been paid in full. There is no record of Suzanne having any climbing experience, other than receiving confirmation that she completed an Everest Base Camp hike the year before in 2022. Working as a teacher in one of the largest government schools in Silvassa, India, it appears as though she led a very normal lifestyle. Suzanne was not overly active, and it is clear she did not have the necessary experience for a mountain like Everest. Despite all this, the 59-year-old teacher would not take no for an answer and would participate in her third acclimation trip during the second week of May. It started in the morning. There were a few clouds, but nothing too worrisome. Hours would tick by as the sun burned over them, moving across the sky. Each step you could hear the crunch of white great snow under boots. By the time they had reached Crompton Point, 12 hours had passed, 6 hours slower than her previous time, and by far the worst time. Yet a very concerning sign was that Suzanne was not showing any progress. In fact, quite the opposite, each attempt her times have increased, indicating she was not improving but rather declining. After this trip, Suzanne reported issues with her throat and stated that she found it very challenging to swallow food. On top of that, she had started to develop a cold and was beginning to feel sick. It was clear to her Sherpa a more direct approach was needed, and thus they had a conversation where Suzanne was told word for word that if she continued she would die. It's hard to understand what was going through her head at this moment. Despite being told such a harrowing thought and against all advice given to her, she refused to leave base camp, determined to climb Everest at any cost. Unfortunately, at this point, Suzanne was becoming a safety risk to not only herself, but to those around her as well. Her condition rapidly deteriorated as the sickness was becoming worse each day. Suzanne would begin her Everest attempt on May 17th, but there was not much to be said about this, as she would only make it 500 meters above base camp. Before having to stop, the Sherpa with Suzanne had seen enough and strongly against her wishes called in a helicopter to have her evacuated. Even though she had not made much progress, her condition had gotten so bad she can no longer climb down from their location. When the helicopter arrived, Suzanne refused to go and had to be forcibly removed from the mountain. She was in such a bad state they flew her directly to Lukla, a small town in northeastern Nepal, for medical assistance, where she would receive care all night, but unfortunately at 5 a.m. on May 18th, was pronounced dead. Her body would be transported to Kathmandu for an autopsy to further learn more, and from their family would take over. This story is truly unique because, in the past seasons on Everest, there would have never been an inexperienced climber like Suzanne. Being the tallest mountain in the world, many look at it as some sort of challenge. A box on a piece of paper that can be checked off by a pencil, but if you don't take the mountain seriously, it's not a matter of if a similar story like Suzanne's will occur, it's only a matter of when.